Good evening. Welcome to Legends of Myths and Monsters with Investigator News, and I'm your host, Ellie. Tonight, vampires. Just when you need a bite in the neck, huh? But this, I found the myth and the folklore very interesting, all the way to Bram Stoker and all the way to even the real life Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney and quite a few others. And a long time figure of myth and folklore by basically the 1800s. The vampire becomes part of literature through the works um, such as the vampire Carmilla. And this figure takes to the stage embodying the secret lust of 1800s England. Now, the greatest of them all is about to be born in immortal life through the book that will elevate the romantic, eerie, terrifying figure, the vampire. And we'll meet the alleged real life counterpart, none other than Count Dracula, to see the influence that he has let loose in today's world. Because vampires hold their place as one of the grandest monsters among all of us. And, it really started in 1431 in Transylvania in Sigiswara, when the son is born to Valetian Vlad II. Hello, Linda, you're going to like this. So, upon the child of Vlad III, the birth of his father is invested as a prince of Wallachia. And given the new name with his title, he's known as Vad Dracul, his surname translation of dragon or even devil. So the 1437 leads to Dracul to make an unfortunate alliance with the Turks of the Ottoman Empire to grant them a later passage through Wallachia to Transylvania. And the invasion is unsuccessful, and Vlad Dracul is ousted from the throne by a vengeful Hungarian army with a Turkish sultan. It's doubtful that he can trust Vlad and imprisons the fallen prince to prove his loyalty to gain freedom. He leaves his sons Vlad III, uh, Radu, under the Ottoman capacity. Now, the Ottomans' abuse of treatment of blood, three in particular, will create a monster of legendary proportions. And Vlad Dracul wars against the Hungarian governor, John Hunyadi, and it ending with his assassination 5 years after Valencia, ruling class of the Boyars oust him from power. Now, his son Vlad III, the brother of Murcia, are tortured by the Romans and buried alive. Linda, these guys are brutal. They I started reading this and I was like, and this is where in Romania and the Turks and the, um, oh my goodness, they all seem to be bloodthirsty and they even drink and eat blood. So, oh boy. So, they torture by the Romans and they're buried alive. And Hunyadi grants the throne to Verislav II, another member of Vlad's line. Instead of Lord the Third, it's an unlikely holy alliance, and it's formed between Hayati and the angry Vlad III. 9 days later, after Hunyadi's death by plague on August 20th of 1456, Vlad III kills of Vladislav II, and one in a one-by-one combat. And the throne of Wallachia is now his. That God will help anyone in his way, from the capital home of Targovista. And Glad 3 takes the first act of revenge against the greedy Boyars. He blames him for the death of his father and his brother, inviting the Boyars and their families to a feast at his home. He arrests them afterwards and impales them, and the older ones leaving their bodies on display around the castle on long poles made of wood or metal. And it's inserted through the victims either through the center of their body or other horrible places. And sometimes it comes out around the mouth. If the pole is unsharpened and no internal organs are directly injured, the victims can live for days in agony as their screams can be heard. And such as the boyars twitching until their inevitable deaths. Vlad sends the younger on the march to Argus River to join the laborers building post, uh, his outpost castle, known today as Castle Dracula Vlad's legend quickly grows. So he became very popular. Now, because he got rid of the bad guys, well, I guess so. But he is now impaling people on these poles. Um, so people, so the people to dig, okay, so his legend quickly grows and he forces the people to dig their own graves. Then he boils them, sets them aflame. He destroyed all the churches. His new name of Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler. So he then turned from popular to very unpopular. And he reinforced his monstrous reputation. And it is rumors that he is to dine amongst the Poles, bearing his victims, sputtering in agony, as he uses their blood as a dressing for his bread. So he ate amongst the suffering, and he used their blood on his bread. And in some stories, he was even drinking it as it dripped. Uh, this is very horrible. Oh boy. And that was in 19, that was in 1462. I say 1962, all of us are going to be shrieking. Okay, so uh, he says he killed the peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived in Oblitia and Nova Solo, and where the Danube flows into the sea. I know I'm saying these things wrong. So they killed 23,000 Turks without counting. And then they burned the homes of all the Turks. And they burned also the homes of the Turks whose head they were cut off. And the soldiers that year, Vlad said, and is defeated by an army of Turks led by his own brother Radu, and pursued to a castle Dracula, legend has it. Now, he did have a wife, but that wife, she decided to jump to her death in the river from the top of the castle. Now, I can see why. I don't, this scary stuff makes me laugh, folks. I'm sorry. It's why people don't take me in haunted houses. I turned the scare into too much fun. So, um, boy, so his wife jumps to her death into the river below, while he himself escapes through a secret tunnel. And the Hungarians are after him at this time. And they arrest Vlad and they imprison him. Now, until 1475, when he was freed to take the Valetian throne back, Vlad Tepes is assassinated in 1476. So they let him loose. He goes back for the crowd to assassinate him. And the story goes on that he's beheaded and his head is impaled on one of them stakes in Constantinople. And the total of Vad's impaler victims range from 40,000, they say possibly even 80,000. But the death is merely just the beginning of Vlad's story, and his cruelty will become immortalized through literature and the magic of London theater. And as horrible as that sounds, they did find that Vlad was very popular, written, or even in a play in the London theater. And in London in the late 1800s, a stone debate. It's in London in 1800. An Irish theater manager wrote a writer, uh, Bram Stoker, is about to change the world between touring and managing the theater in London. Stoker holds a copy of his first novel in his hand. It's called The Snake's Pass, and he wrote it in 1890. And The Snake's Pass was basically a flop, and it will fade into obscurity. And it's overshadowed by the work of Stoker that begins. He takes notes for a year, and he's working on it very hard, and he just needs one good main character. And one night everything changes as Stoker is awakened from a sleep in a vision. It is a ghostly, eerie vision of a vampire emerging from a tomb while vacationing in Whitby, Yorkshire. And in that summer, he comes across the name in the library book, and the name will lead to his own immortality and his character, originally named Count Vampire, in the book's early notes, and um, he gains a popularity because of this book. And it's called from real life one that struck terror in countless hearts of past, and will do so even today. Now, Dracula published in 1897, and Dracula is told through a collection of first person accounts. From the main propagandist to sundry news clippings, it combines these elements into a narrative that forces the reader to fill in the blanks, and also for them to get absorbed in the book. And while he's working through a series of potentially unreliable narrators, it's because it makes the world of Dracula and horror within it seem much more precarious and terrifying. And Dracula opens with um, solicitor Jonathan Harker's traveling to Transylvania to meet his enigmatic client, Count Dracula. A solicitor, Jonathan Harker, is thrown into an old world of superstition and the occult on his way to meet uh, this Count Dracula in his Transylvania castle. And Harker is prompted, held prisoner by the cold and calculating Count, and left at the hands of the Dracula Three, the three vampire brides. In a feed of travels to his home in England, Stoker allows the vampire to live during the daylight and powerless, and gives him the ability to mesmerize his victims and control wolves, rats, and transform himself into a bat and a wolf. And himself, his limitations include the ability to cross running, uh, and a water and a lack of reflection in mirrors, and a need to be invited in before entering a place. And in the introduction of Dutch, Dr. Abraham Van Helsing, who lives with one foot in the old world and the other in the modern and the scientific, where the truth about Dracula's vampiric nature is revealed. And he has turned to Lucy, the friend of Harker's fiancee, Mina, into a vampire. And once the innocent woman has become Dracula's new bride, as she drinks the blood of children at night, the reader experiences this terror firsthand. And then Lucy's fiance, Arthur, and his friends Quincy and Dr. Stewart confront her with Van Helsing, Lucy West and Rob. Um, but yet, how changed the sweetness was turned to heartless cruelty, and the purity of basically what Van Helsing stepped out of an obedient, and his gesture was all advanced to the four of the ones ranged in line before the door of the tomb. Boy, I tell you, I don't know if I could have read that book. Van Helsing raised his lantern and drew the slide of the concentrated light that fell on Lucy's face, and he could see that her lips of crimson with fresh blood that streamed had trickled over her chin, and her she had a death throat, and they all shuddered in horror. They could see the light, the tremendous light of Van Gale. When Lucy, she said they called the thing that was before us, that bore the shape of an angry vampiress. She drew back with an angry snarl, and such as a cat given Lucy's eyes to form a color. But Lucy's eyes, unclean and full of hell fire, instead of pure gentle orbs, we knew at that moment that with remnant for him, with outstretched arms and a wanton smile, he fell back and hid his face in his hands. She still advanced, however, boy, now I got a bird going. But yeah, I'm throwing stuff at the bird and the dog. So, um, so anyway, this is all kind of the book he wrote about Vlad, the vampire, and of what was going on over there. And this was supposedly the true story, he said. And get this, 3,000 copies of it sold. But it didn't sell enough to warrant a second print, and later published in America in 1899. Uh, this fiction, actually, definitely the most famous work of a fiction in regards to vampires, is the story of Dracula by Bram Stoker, and it was not popular in its day, and no one really understood why, as it later came into the 20th century. And it does not inspire an overnight vampire sensation, though. And the ghostly tale will doubtlessly haunt some people for a long time to come. And if you have a bad taste after reading this book, you will probably read on to finish it and basically um, either like it or love it, they say. And so the worst is when the Lyceum catches fire and the theater closes shortly after 1902. And Stoker is left solely dependent on his writings. And so, as he, in 1906, um, he did a second and then one 3 years later, other books. And then later he found out he had Bright's disease and gout. And by the time of Bram Stoker's death in 1912, he was receiving only an average of 80 pounds a month in royalties for Dracula. And 8 years later, a film, a medium, in its infancy, Dracula is about to begin its own new form in 1922 when a German filmmaker adapts Dracula to the film for his masterpiece and a symphony of horrors. The film is more than just inspired by Stoker's story, but only the character names in the film setting are changed. In effort to avoid paying what they call permissions, it would be called copyright now. Instead of the Count Dracula's actor, Max Schreck, it plays like a rat-like and frightening Count Warlock, and with heavy shadow and makeup, and creates the atmosphere of doom. And the entirety, Shrek's performance is really kind of chilling. They make him scary. He is not a handsome what Bram Stoker had presented as Dracula. Now, uh, it is quite chilling, and Stoker's widow sues the film studio for infringement after a 3 year legal battle. The German court orders all prints destroyed, and luckily, copies of the Mirnu masterpiece of the German expression managed to survive. And through its unauthorized, and it is amongst the greatest, most terrifying of all film adaptation of the novel. But the vision that the vampire, with buck teeth, a bald head, and it seemed to seeped into a sort of alternate, more ugly view, less romantic version of the vampire. So if I don't know if you guys, I think I believe, folks, it's a silent film. And I tried to find it and I couldn't because I'm thinking buck teeth and a bald guy. Now that's not even scary. That's comical. But they say he was very scary. And so the vampire in which you see in things are more likely modern films like Salem's Lot and other films where you get more of a less rodent-like vampire and more of a Dracula of sexy proportions. I don't know, William. Do you think he's? I don't know if some of them um, were so sexy. I want to see the buck teeth bald guy. Is I just can't get that out of my head. And it's been in my head all day long today and giggling about it. So meanwhile, the vampire hysteria of the old world gives way to a much real one in the new world uh, than that of the 1800s Germany that they experienced. And um, so the vampire related deaths of victims that are bitten through the throat and their blood drunk out. And the city is gripped to this werewolf type of murder and reported. Um, so it got to where it became more and more popular. And then out of the blue, uh, they had quite a few young boys go up missing and this was in 1924. And the ones that were playing around the riverbank come across a human skull. And it's followed by a second skull 12 days closer. And two more skulls, and the victims' heads have been separated from their torsos. And so, shortly after the boys that were playing in the marshland find this bag of human bones, and a town-wide search for further remains yield a staggering 500 pieces of human bodies. And they say they range from victims age 15 to 20. And the murderer ends up being Fritz Harman. And he claims to be a vampire himself, and he's a petty thief who had been committed to psychiatric care on more than one occasion. Now, he often picked up young boys or hired male prostitutes. And Harmon had already been in prison in 1919 and charged with having illegal sex. And while he was doing the jail time for another act, the police make grisly discovery in the apartment that Harmon shares with um, his lover. Is located in the haunted area of Hanover. They find the remains of 20 victims that Harmon had. Um, and not only that, he was posing as a detective and would lure these boys to his apartment from the train station, from playgrounds, from other places where boys or young men would be at. He would basically forcibly um, uh, torture. Then, when it was close to the time that he needed to kill them, he would slit their throats and drink their blood. But he would bite them, they said. And so Fritz Harman, the so called vampire of Hanover, killed more than 50 victims. He is beheaded on April 1925. And his lover, Hans Grans, is imprisoned to life for Harman's, uh, for imprisoned for life. And Harman's brain is sent to Göttingen University for study and upon the investigation. It can never be as shocking and disturbing as the thoughts of her horrific impulses of the madam in Germany, longtime criminal Peter Curtin begins. The murder spree will earn him the nickname of Dusseldorf Vampire and also serves the basis of Fritz's long, terrifying 1931 film. Uh, Curtin, uh, Curtin is no stranger to crime, and he reaches adulthood in two boys, nine, when he basically pushed them into the water. He jumped them, he strangled them. And not only that, he murdered a woman. She was when when he was 17. So Curtin goes on this big murder spree, stabbing deaths of two children, along with nine. So now we have what they say is another vampire. They claim because he would want to drink their blood, and also had the a strange urge to bite. So um, in basically back in England, Dracula is all ready to make its stage debut, and the book is first dramatized from the book's publication, and it runs 5 acts and 47 scenes with Stoker as the Count. And one night performance and held to lay claim to the license. Dracula's proper stage debut is in 1924, and that was in Derby, England, adapted by Stoker's friend Hamilton Dean and starring Raymond Huntley as the Count. And Huntley guns a tuxedo and a cape as Dracula, creating a vampire seductive through worldly sophistication. The costume will become the trademark of Dracula, as well as Dracula fangs. And 3 years later, basically, in London for Valentine's Day, an opening night for 391 performances. And so, um, and it streamlined the cast of characters even further. Official Broadway premiere. Dracula is on in October of 1927. The cast is led in a Hungarian actor who brings an eerily reality to the otherworld Count Dracula as an actor. Um, and then if you go a little bit further, then they found an actor, one that fit the part perfectly. And who was it? Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi was born in Hungary in 1882, about 400 miles from Transylvania Alps. And after establishing himself as an actor, he was forced to flee Hungary for political reasons. And in 1918, migrated to Vienna and then to Berlin after divorcing his first wife. Lugosi set sail to find the fortunes in New York. And even though he was not bilingual, he learned his lines very well. And that skill became very handy in his first American role the following year uh, in the production of Red Poppy. When Dracula moved to Broadway, Lugosi won the role of this distinctive accent, and it was his character's voice that won him basically the role and the main character of Dracula for generations to come. In 1927 marks Lugosi's debut as Dracula, but also one of the first major American vampire films. And it's director Todd Browning's in London's After Midnight. It also stars Lon Chaney, known as the Man of a Thousand Faces. As the vampire, Browning will go down as a master of the horror films, as well as important figure both Dracula and Lugosi's lives. They ran basically, um, they worked as a sideshow as living corpses, and the act involved being buried alive. So this brought in quite a few horror movies that scared many of the day. And the short films could be viewed or mere a nickel. And surprisingly, if you look at the what the ticket prices are today. Now, Browning, together with actor Lon Chaney, their collaboration will span 10 films. And These Unholy Three is Browning's first critical and commercial success. And uh, and then not only that, but when Universal Pictures gives him the task of bringing the Dracula stage play to film, Browning's first intention for Cheney to play um, vampire. And a tragic death in 1930 grants Lugosi, who lobbied for the hard role, a chance to continue as the immortal count. So they lost Lon, and they ended up with Lugosi anyway. And the largest obstacle, however, is Stoker's widow again. She wants Universal to pay $50,000 for the adaptation rights, but Lugosi himself intervenes and convinces her to bring it down to more possible 40,000, but the condition is that he only gets to play Dracula Lugosi and does get the part for a guess what? For a mere $500 is what they paid top stars back then. And over the course of 7 week shoot, uh, Dracula premieres in February of 1931. Tickets are so scarce that many theaters have to run it around the clock to meet the demand. 700,000 to 1.2 million worldwide tickets. Um, so basically, when he was interviewed, folks, he would play the part and he would talk about look deep into my eyes. If it was a woman reporter, he would tell her that if she looked deep into his eyes, that she would see the future between them, and it would probably be a bite or two. He was uh, very, very, they say, seductive. But when it came to men, he would basically talk about um, uh, how uh, he would he could win them over and let them visit with his vampiresses, and they would bite them because they were very seductive and very beautiful. So, uh, it's they said the women say he was frightfully weird, and they said there was nobody like him, but he would tell you the truth and a chance. And he says he only told them the truth to take a chance to look deep into the heart and in their mind. And if he found something worthwhile, human kindness or something more, but they would have to look deep into his eyes. Oh yeah, I understand that. I don't know. Was he? To me, he did have a wife, but I think he was just blowing in the ears of these women and trying to seduce them. But the way the article got into it, it was like he would really lean close to them, and he would, blow in their ear, and he talked dirty to them, I bet. So. Uh, Think of that, all those Bela Lugosi movies. Boy, what, Linda, what do you think? You're up there with me. I know my mom watched him and she loved him. Um, so as we, as they moved on with uh, uh, this, he made, I think it was about close to 30 they say, vampire movies. And he ended up falling, they say, out of vampire stardom. And his stardom basically led to a lot of, they say, drugs and alcohol, opioids. And he did go into a treatment center where he eventually died. And so the next one we were kind of looking at was Boris Karloff. He was the next one, and this was 12 years later. And he did Frankenstein, but since Lon Chaney Jr. was the next monster, uh, between the two, um, uh, they both looked at the Frankenstein movies, the Wolfman movies, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Dracula, and the time was played for the two of them back and forth for quite a few movies. And then basically it went on to John Carradine, who will go on to play the Count more times than Lugosi. And the second final turn on Dracula in 1948's Abbott and Costello was one of the last times you see the three together. And it's followed by 1951 theatrical tour Dracula and a vampire play, and this revival of Dean's production. And the next year, while Lugosi struggles with his addiction, um, his career basically went spiraling down over the last few years when he started getting heavy into this heavy drinking. And he did admit that he had a drug addiction. And he said he struggled with it for many, many years. And like I said, he ended up going in. And um, the one night that he said he was actually starting to feel like he could overcome this was the night that he passed away. Um, he died in his sleep in 1956. He was 73 years old. So he lived a long life, but the problem was he never made money as Dracula. He made very little and basically lived very poorly for most of his life. So as we're looking into the 1958 production of Dracula, for American release, Christopher Lee cuts an imposing figure of the Count. For his interpretation, he uh, he shuns watching Lugosi films, and he said he wanted to come up with his own type of Dracula. And closer to Stoker's novel, Lee plays Count Dracula for almost 20 years through about 10 films. And he does a lot with the witches. He says go went bump in the night. He said these are fantasy creatures, maybe even old grim nursery rhymes. And for the witches, they certainly exist. And he said 90% of them are charlatans, but things do go bump in the night. And often um, uh, dark ages and worship of unnatural substances is quite common, he said, for part of Hollywood. So he said it was very easily for him to fit in. And he said, the fountainhead of life itself, he says, it seems like the glorification of blood is more often not body blood, but the vampire makes his way, ironically, uh, into this fake. He said it was like a thick cherry syrup, and he said it was very very sweet, and he said it was hard to do cherry cokes after that. And after a 1966, then it starts growing to where we're seeing vampires on TV with the gothic soap opera Dark Shadows. And it takes place in a spooky New England mansion on a coastal town. And it originally features the normal trappings of a soap opera with with the small uh, little hints of supernatural thrown in. And the rating slip creator Dan Curtis is inspired to introduce a vampire like an anti-hero, and this is where in comes Barnabas Collins, and he's played by actor Jonathan Frid. Barnabas saves the show because it was running really badly, and it ended up because of Barnabas 1,225 episodes, and it ran till 1971. There was a ban that was uh, on American comics to where they were wanting to copy Barnabas. But not only that, but the American comic book censored code basically, they said, came from Barnabas himself and Dark Shadows, that it was a copyright and they couldn't make the comic books into it or any type of cartoons at the time. And it proved to be stifling for a time, because once the series had ended, it could not be repeated. And of course, it was at that time, they had fear of juvenile delinquency that they thought was being caused. And as crazy as it sounds, they said basically that's one of the other reasons why they didn't want to do comic books, because it would get teenagers wanting to be dark and do bad things. Boy, they'd probably laugh at them today. So, um, so basically, they said they went with Frankenstein and Dracula in other ways of the comics, and it launched quite a few of the comic books in 1971. And so they didn't really need Dark Shadows, they found out. And um, let's see. The other one, they said, 1973 was um, they were looking at Jack Palance, who later played Jack Dracula in 1973. If you didn't know that, and it's produced by Dan Curtis, and who created Dark Shadows. And so, um, as you know, as it goes on, they said that the history of Marvel Comics made it more made it more of a superhero, um, and it fell to the wayside until lately when you started seeing Buffy and these other ones like Blade. They said and vampire hunters. Um, a half breed of man whose mother was bitten by a vampire. She was given birth to him, and it gave him vampire abilities. And though making him a hunter, a vampire premiered in the pages of the Tomb of Dracula, and a little bit like your heroes at the time. But this movie flopped, and they said so they knew that um, basically it wasn't going to work. Another thing they tried was Blackula. Now that seemed to be more popular than anything they'd had in 10 years. And it started to bring everything around, like I told you about Blade. And towards the 1990s, New Line Cinema made Blade a film, and it featured Wesley Snipes' Blade, and the success of the movie basically to make the start of X-Men. So um, and so what they did is they said that Blade was pulled by the comics itself, and it was a venture of 20 years of vampires that they created Blade with. And Blade in the Tomb of Dracula, as created by Marv Wolfman. And so uh, Gene Colan, artist, actor, and director, Sammo Hong's 1980 film encounters spooky and introduces a new genre that combines horror and comedy with kung fu action. And Hung produces the first Mr. Vampire film, and that was in '85. And even for television, a series and stage play, actor Gary Coleman portrays Dracula in Bram Stoker's Dracula, a lavish adaptation of the novel by Francis Ford Coppola rather than the offshoot of the stage play. Now, when Buffy the Vampire Slayer hit theaters in '92, it's not they're not really entirely happy with the movie in itself, but they said that basically they were just laughing at it. And when Buffy comes to TV as a series, then it proved itself. And it was the success for the first time. Vampires are scary, but okay. Um, and it's brought to younger readers, almost like Dark Shadows did of the '60s. Then in 2005, the Twilight series came out, And it's a high school romance, and it features both vampires and werewolves. And before the 10th anniversary of Twilight's release, all four novels are made into blockbuster films. A lot of times people say they know and they've seen the original Dracula and Frankenstein, or they have read Mary Shelley's um, and they appreciate the classics, but then people come along and remake this stuff, and sometimes it can be really terrible. And there are so many corny um, uh, Dracula movies that they say it's hard for a gem to shine for years. And they said sometimes they think they can put a film out and then they have to pull it back and then add to it or create a whole movie. And they said they always hesitate um, when they think about Shelley that wrote for her era was translated into the film in the 30s, but it was not meant for the audience back there. It wasn't till the 70s came around that the whole different generation of people who never knew Shelley or Bram Stoker's was actually starting to make a comeback. And the same mythology that they bring to the new audience, the new generation and audience goes back to the classics and the Hammer films. And they say that the younger generation goes for the Bram Stoker and Shelley and the blood and the bites, where the older folks will go back to the sexy Bela Lugosi. And so, what about Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula? Another generation has passed. So, when people come and say that they are holding on to the classics, um, they always want the older people to take a fresh new look at vampires. Well, they say they're just ignoring it, and so um, so to this day, I still think it's romance on both sides because they always seem to want to put a romantic spin on Dracula. Uh, and a lot of the 50s and 60s, if we want to get into the costumes. Most kids in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, number one pick was Count Dracula. They all wanted to get the vampire fangs, and they wanted to wear the cape, and they wanted to be scary, and they wanted to bite people. And they're still, to this day, they say there's always that little boy that wants to be Count Dracula. And and as we now are looking over in Europe, they are now finding bodies piled up in graves around Transylvania that have fangs, and they found about 50 of them so far. And so they said they looked at the teeth and they looked to see, and these are bodies that was back in the 1500s, they say. So they looked at maybe saw marks or file marks on these teeth, and they're not finding it, but they're finding lots of bodies that do have uh, the teeth have fangs. And not only that, but they're starting to look in many places that the original Vlad, the Impaler, uh, and they're looking around the area to where he would have buried a lot of bodies. And more, they will run, they say 20, 30 bodies, and they'll find one that has vampire markings. Some, they said, even have where they have had a stake through the chest. Some still have the stake in the chest. Some are have bottles of holy water with them. It goes all the way into the 1800s to where you see more of a silver bullet in their forehead. Um, so these are the vampire hunters. And so as Vlad was only just a vicious king that wanted to kill people. They are now saying they're finding vampires over there around Germany. So, yeah, that's spooky. That's definitely pretty spooky. Boy, I'm ending quick tonight. Um, so, and the other thing is a lot of these movies, um, even Interview with a Vampire with Tom Cruise, that put a sexy spin, they say, on uh, on the whole vampire movies, and they say even with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that it puts kids wanting to do this. And so now in Hollywood, there is a group or a cult where they do go and they get plasma or from the blood bank, or they're even draining some of their own blood and drinking their own blood. And they have vampire parties. And of course, they're filing their own teeth. It's not nothing like what we seen from Vlad's era, where there was no filings on the teeth. But this is what the Hollywood kids are doing, and they seem to think this is fun. And not only that, they're doing mock killings. They're um, not only this is they say, and I've looked into it, that turned into the pet parties, and other parties it turned into is eating humans, to where they and I've told my viewers about this, where it looks like a real body that's laying on the table, but it's actually a cake. Now they've also got real bodies they eat off of. It's just creepy in Hollywood what they do, and they're saying, get this. Um, some of Carradine and him and his sons all said, and sometimes I wonder if this is what happened to David Carradine, that they were going to um, expose Hollywood for some of the stuff they were doing with the blood, but also some of these cult parties that were just blood oriented, and it was all about the blood. He said a lot of it wasn't real blood, and a lot of it was just gross. He said, but it's a cult and a culture and society that they have been turning to. And it's not just Carradine's. Um, there was a friend of mine that was in Carmel, and she happened to run across, um, um, oh boy, um, uh, oh boy, Clint Eastwood. I'm sorry, folks. I had a brain fart. Um, so she run across Clint Eastwood and asked him about it too. And he said he had to pull all of his movies over to Mel Paso. He said, because if you're not in with Hollywood, you don't make it. And they really do some sick stuff. And a couple of them he felt were very evil. So that's something that he's even disclosed. And many stars, they say that just won't submit to the Hollywood cults, and it's an evilness, they say. If they don't submit to it, then they don't make it. They don't make it in the movie industry. And there's other I'm going to say cults, just stick with cults, that happen in Hollywood, of just very evil things that they do. um, so, anybody have questions? It started with Vlad, and look how they twisted it. It wasn't even about Vlad. And see, that was the thing that got me. It went from Vlad, and all of a sudden it's Bela Lugosi and um, Bram Stoker. It was really Bram Stoker that changed and made the Dracula for what he is today, and the vampires, because Vlad was just throwing people onto spikes and watching them suffer. And of course, he drank the blood, but it was really Bram Stoker that brought the vampire to life uh, in not only literature, but even to the stage, and onward to more literature being written to the movies that we see today. So it really wasn't about Vlad the Impaler. It was more about Bram Stoker that created the vampire. And a lot of people really don't know that. They think, oh, yeah, it was Vlad the Impaler that is the original Dracula. Not really. I'm going to say it was Bram Stoker. He's the original vampire. He's the one that got the idea. he had the vision in the middle of the night, and he's the one that decided to say, you know what, we're going to make him sexy. He's going to have women that bite and drink blood, and he's the one that changed history. And for what we know today, for horror classics. Um, like it said, some people are drawn to Bela Lugosi and his sexy ways, and um, Tom Cruise, they say, brought back the Bela Lugosi sexiness to the vampire, and that could win over many, many girls, they said. So, with that, folks, that is it. I hope you enjoyed vampires tonight. Um, maybe you wanted to hear the blood, the guts, and the sucking of the blood, but I wanted to give you, the facts. And a lot of people never looked at it historically. That Vlad was real, and Bram Stoker was real, and he was one heck of a writer for what has been created today. And I think we ought to thank that man. And I wonder if his wife ever really got more money than what she was asking for, since they didn't really make any money off of it, of the original. And then we hear Bela Lugosi only made 500 a film, to where look at what they're getting paid today for their work in making Dracula very popular. All right, folks. So that's it. We will be back tomorrow morning with the weather morning show and news. If that's what you like to watch with us. If not, we'll be back next week with Legends, Myths, and Monsters. Uh, but you come and join us in the morning for the news. Give us a try. And, I want everybody to subscribe and hit that bell. Make sure you still are getting um, notified. YouTube notified me today that they updated everybody again, which means they took a bunch of people out. But it was an update, and they said for people on their TVs, their phones, uh, the computers itself, they updated quite a few things with YouTube. So be sure to hit the bell if you didn't get notified. Also, the like and share Legends of Myths and Monsters. We've been going for a very long time, and I'm having fun doing it. And so over on Facebook, boy, I tell you, more and more new viewers, and welcome to watching us. Um, and we will over there hit the follow, hit the like, and that way you'll be able to get notified when the shows are on Facebook. Uh, so with that, everyone, you guys go watch a Bella Lugosi or go watch a vampire movie, and have fun with it tonight. So with that, we will see everyone in the morning. Have a wonderful Monday, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye, folks.
Know you've been a good friend, and that's in the thick and thin.